As Ukraine reels from weeks of violent protests, a defiant President Yanukovych says that his government is doing all it can to end the political crisis, and he blames the opposition for inflaming the situation. His online statement was issued shortly after Mr. Yanukovych left work this morning, apparently suffering from a fever and respiratory illness. The president and his people have made a number of concessions to opposition demands, including passing an amnesty bill for detained protesters. But the opposition is having none of it, refusing the conditions attached, mainly to tear down their barricades and get out of government buildings that they've occupied. Many say they won't stop until the president leaves power. The escalating crisis is ringing alarm bells from the EU headquarters to the White House. President Obama called for the right to free expression in Ukraine, and there is word now the US may be considering targeted sanctions against Kiev. At home, two former Ukrainian presidents are warning of the risk of civil war unless this crisis is resolved. One of them, Viktor Yushchenko, is my guest tonight. He was, of course, the leader of Ukraine's Orange Revolution in the 2004 mass protests that swept him to power after beating current President Viktor Yanukovych. Before he joins me, it is perhaps worth remembering the vicious nature of Ukrainian politics, because when I first met him, just as he took office, he had been poisoned and his face was disfigured.
People cry when they see my face. But my country has also been disfigured.
Mr. President, do you know who did this to you specifically?
Безумовно, це зробили мої опоненти від влади.
I have no doubt this was done by my opponents in the government. That's who would benefit the most from my death.
But very much still alive and still fighting as hard as ever for Ukraine to fulfill a European destiny. He told me today this crisis would not be resolved unless his country can escape Moscow's icy grip and join in association with Europe, which, of course, was the catalyst that sparked this revolution 2 months ago. The program, thank you for joining me. From his sickbed, President Yanukovych has now sent a statement, an address to the Ukrainian people, in which he says that he has done a lot. He's made a lot of concessions. He's saying that the opposition continues to escalate the situation, and he urges people to stand back and to come together and to resolve this together. Do you agree that President Yanukovych has made enough concessions to the opposition?
Я гадаю, що основне питання, яке було
I believe that the main question which is formulated by the Ukrainian Euromaidan protesters is the realization of the European political course of the country. It is the most important. It's the formulation of a free trade zone with the European Union. It's a roadmap of a visa-free regime. In other words, it's a return to the policy of democracy and freedom.
You are very concerned that there should not be a re-Sovietization of Ukraine. You've said that before. Therefore, what message do you think President Putin is getting from this uprising, from these protests and demonstrations?
Ну, власне кажучи, все, що відбувається з першого дня на Майдані, це антиросійські...
Well, everything that takes place on Maidan, its anti-Russian messages, its messages to Europe, and what happened in December when the authorities turned away from the European road and went on signing the Asian Policy Pact, including $15 billion of financial aid for Ukraine, reduction of gas price and so on. It's like 300 years ago, a similar political agreement was signed, which took away sovereignty and independence for 3.5 centuries. Ukraine is geographically the biggest country in Europe that decided, and there is a relevant parliament decision, that it wanted to integrate into Europe. 2/3 of Ukrainian citizens confirmed their choice, European. These are the main messages that the Ukrainian nation is sending. We want to go into Europe. It's our home. We want to return back to our home.
I see you framing this entire thing in the association with Europe. Therefore, do you think the EU is at all to blame for any of this? In other words, did they play their cards correctly as well when this idea of the association came up?
Я хочу сказати, що в російській політиці українське питання завжди стоїть на першому місці.
I would simply like Europe to feel that it's its responsibility, that the European policies have to be active,
Європейський вибір України.
that the European missions today must work in Ukraine, not just one day or two, a week. It's a crucially important matter for the peace of the continent and democracy.
The
United States, President Obama looks to be very worried about what's going on in Ukraine, and Congress may be considering sanctions against Ukraine. Do you support that move?
Безумовно, це питання
Without a doubt, it's a very important question, but it's not enough for one reason. We don't have a joint plan of our integration. The questions of the type you mentioned, they might not have the final intention of the resolution of the crisis as we would like to see it.
So do you believe that the current opposition leaders, Arseniy and Vitaly Klitschko, do they have a strategic plan? Are they capable of taking the leadership of Ukraine, or at least, you know, taking the leadership of the opposition? Because some people in Ukraine are very concerned that they may not be prepared for leadership.
Як я бачу, то
As I see it, it looks to me that, from the political opposition side, a comprehensive pack has not been formed which would provide the answer to the people on Maidan regarding the plan of action as to the European integration. That's foremost. It's related to the fight for power, but relates less to the fight for the strategic course of the country.
Do you think that these protests should go on? And do you believe that Mr. Klitschko and Mr. Arseniy have control of the streets?
Я не думаю, що політична опозиція України.
I don't think that the political opposition of Ukraine has control of the entire situation on Maidan.
І це є правда.
And that's true. And it looks like those expectations and hopes that are held on Ukrainian Maidan need to be expressed stronger in political tactics, including the Ukrainian parliament.
Ті очікування, сподівання,
Synchronization must take place of those political statements,
щоб відбувся синхрон.
those political goals which Maidan formed.
Заяв тих політичних задач, які сформулював Майдан.
And I'll remind you that Maidan, on the 29th of November last year, formulated the question of changing the political course. This agenda should not change.
Питання зміни політичного курсу.
Former President Yushchenko, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Дякую вам. Хай щастить вам.